There is a man dying alone in an empty room. No music, no dramatic lighting, just silence, a locker room, and a heart that finally gives out. Hours earlier, that same man had just received the single greatest piece of news of his entire adult life. And nobody was there to hear it land. Not his wife, not his genius son, not even the daughter who loved him more than anyone else in that house. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to look at young Sheldon completely differently. This was never really a show about a boy genius. It's a slow, quiet tragedy about the one man in that family nobody actually bothered to see. And the last 10 minutes of his life hide a detail the writers buried in plain sight for 7 straight years, one most fans still haven't connected. Once you see it, you won't be able to watch that final season the same way again. We're getting there. But first, we need to talk about who George Cooper really was. Because almost everything you think you know about this man is only half the story. Here's the verdict most people get wrong. Fans love to say Sheldon's dad wasted his life, that he was just a beer-drinking coach who never amounted to much. That reading is comfortable. It's also completely backwards. George Cooper wasn't the family's failure. He was its foundation, the one person absorbing every shock so the rest of them didn't have to. And the tragedy isn't that he failed at that job. It's that he succeeded so completely, nobody ever noticed he needed something back. Picture his actual workday. George spends 8, 9, 10 hours managing teenage boys, furious parents, and small-town school politics as a football coach. That is not a relaxing job. It's constant conflict dressed up as a career. Now, picture him walking through his own front door at the end of that shift. What's waiting for him isn't rest. It's a second shift. Sheldon needs a ride somewhere immediately. Missy is mid-meltdown. Georgie broke something again. Mary needs him to fix, explain, or simply show up as a husband right now, no exceptions. Go back through 7 seasons and count the scenes where someone genuinely asks George how his day was, not as a throwaway line, but because they actually want the answer. You'll struggle to find more than a couple. That's not an accident of writing. That's the entire architecture of this character, and almost nobody talks about it out loud. Think about what that actually trains a person to do over years and years. When home stops being a place you're asked about and starts being a place where you're immediately needed, you stop expecting to be asked at all. George stops walking through that door, hoping for a check-in. He walks through it already braced for the next thing someone wants from him. That's not a personality trait. That's a learned reflex, built one exhausting evening at a time. Here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Every other person in that house has a pressure valve. Somewhere the weight comes off. Mary has church and a pastor who listens to her. Sheldon has his bedroom and his formulas. Missy has her friends and a father who keeps bailing her out. Georgie has the streets and eventually Mandy. Now ask yourself what George gets. A beer in the backyard. A silent chair in front of a television that isn't even really on for the show. A stool at the local bar. Watch those scenes again knowing that. And they read completely differently. That backyard silence isn't a hobby. It's the only room in his entire life where nobody needs anything from him. It's not healthy, it's not sustainable, but it's the closest thing to peace this man is ever allowed to have. And the show never once frames it as a cry for help. Notice the difference, too. Everyone else's escape involves other people. Mary talks to her pastor. Sheldon has Tam and Dr. Sturgis to talk formulas with. Missy has a whole circle of friends. George's escape involves nobody at all. His version of rest is the absence of people, not the company of them. When the one form of comfort you have left is simply being left alone, that's not relaxation anymore. That's exhaustion wearing a calmer face. Now here's a detail from outside the show that quietly reframes everything inside it. In interviews after the finale, actor Lance Barber has talked about an early note from creator Chuck Lorre. Barber initially played George's anger big and broad, almost cartoonish, in an early scene where Meemaw wouldn't share a family recipe. Lorre pulled him aside and redirected the whole performance. This man is intimidating enough already, so don't play him angry, play him hurt. That single note rewired the entire character going forward. Every raised voice after that point isn't rage. It's a wound finding the only exit it has. Every short temper is a man who keeps getting hurt by the people he loves most, with no idea how to say so directly. And here's the part that actually stings. His own family only ever sees the loud version. They never once catch the hurt underneath it, because George never learned how to hand them that part of himself. There's a detail that makes this even heavier once you know it. On the original Big Bang Theory, adult Sheldon describes his late father almost entirely as a drunk, a disappointment, a punchline. That version of George barely resembles the man young Sheldon eventually built. The creators have openly admitted they didn't think that decision through when they wrote it, years before this prequel existed, and that revisiting his life on screen made them realize how unfair that portrait actually was. So think about what that means. The most detailed, sympathetic version of George Cooper only exists because the writers went back and corrected their own mistake. Inside the story itself, though, nobody ever corrects it for him. He dies still believing he's the version his son will remember, not the version we spent 7 seasons actually getting to know. Try this right now. Name one real friend George Cooper has across this entire show. Take your time. Most people land on Coach Wilkins. Except Wilkins is the man who took his job in the first place. Their whole relationship runs on quiet competition long before it becomes anything warmer, and even after they reconcile, it's George rescuing Wilkins, not two equals leaning on each other. Now think about who actually shows up at his house the day he dies. Not a best friend. Principal Peterson, the very man who once fired him, and Coach Wilkins, his former rival. That's the entirety of his closest circle at the single most important moment of his life. A former boss and a former competitor. Respected, sure, liked, absolutely, but not friends in the way everyone else in this house gets to have friends. A well-regarded grown man in a small town doesn't have one single person he could call at 3 in the morning and fall apart in front of. That's not bad luck. That might be the loneliest detail in the entire series. To understand why, you have to rewind before Medford even existed for this family. George was coaching in Galveston, a solid job, a stable life, until he discovered other coaches were illegally recruiting players. He had an easy option available to him: stay quiet, protect the paycheck, protect the family. Instead, he reported it up the chain. The result wasn't a promotion or even a thank you. It was getting fired and effectively pushed out of town. Here's the part that actually stings. Mary never framed that decision as brave. To her, it read as George messing up again, one more disruption to the stable life she was trying to hold together for everyone. Sit with that for a second. This man sacrificed an entire career for doing the one thing decency required of him, and the person closest to him treated it like a personal failure. That's the exact moment his loneliness gets its foundation poured. He learns early that doing the right thing doesn't buy you understanding. It just buys you the right to carry the weight by yourself. And that lesson doesn't stay in the past. It becomes the operating manual for the rest of his life. Every time he makes a hard, principled call later on, quietly, without applause, he's really just repeating Galveston. Do the right thing. Absorb the consequences alone. Don't expect anyone to notice. Once you see that pattern start this early, you start seeing it everywhere else in the show too. Here's a curiosity worth sitting with for a moment. At one point, George is offered a genuine step up, a college coaching job in Tulsa. This is his one real shot at climbing out of Medford for good. Mary shuts it down, not because the move would have broken the family financially, but because she doesn't want to disrupt her church, her routine, her comfort. So George does what he always does. He swallows the disappointment and buries the dream for a family that never fully grasps what that costs him. Fast forward to the finale. A new offer arrives, this time from Rice University. And now finally, Mary says yes. George is overjoyed. He has waited 2 full decades for permission to want something purely for himself. And within hours of hearing that yes, he's gone. Sit with the cruelty of that timing. The show hands him his one moment of vindication and takes the rest of his life away before he can even enjoy a single day of it. Hold on to that detail. We are coming back to it. Now let's talk about Mary, because George's loneliness doesn't fully exist without her transformation. The woman he married as a teenager and the woman he's living with by the finale are close to 2 different people. Somewhere along the way, she found a faith so intense it started functioning like a second marriage, one George was never actually invited into. Every beer, every joke, every flannel shirt got run through an invisible moral checklist. And here's the uncomfortable part fans rarely say out loud. Mary has deep, emotionally intimate conversations about her fears and doubts with her pastor, not with her husband. She never physically strays, and neither does George. But emotionally, he's watching his wife hand her inner life to another man while he lives on the leftovers. He notices. He's not oblivious. He just has nowhere to put that hurt except a bowling alley, a beer, and a neighbor he probably shouldn't be talking to quite as much as he does. He stays faithful anyway. Staying faithful while feeling completely invisible might be the loneliest position in the entire show. Here's the detail that will genuinely sit with you if you let it. George drives his entire family across the state to Houston, straight to NASA, just so a real scientist will take his 9-year-old's math seriously. He doesn't understand one word of the physics involved. He just knows his son is suffering, quite literally making himself sick with stress, and he refuses to let that go unanswered. Now jump forward to the Big Bang Theory. Adult Sheldon remembers his father mostly as a directionless man who once taught him to shoot a bow near a raccoon for laughs, someone he describes as basically drifting until the day he died. The son George rearranged his entire existence around, grows up and turns him into a punchline in casual conversation. And the worst part is George never lives to hear any of it. But there's one person in that house who saw him clearly the whole time. Missy, 11 years old, spending her own allowance on a mug that just says he's the best dad in the world. That mug wasn't a joke to her. It was the only unfiltered, two-way love this man ever received inside his own home, one more layer most fans skip completely. George is a Vietnam veteran, a Across 7 seasons, we get almost nothing about what that actually did to him, because who exactly would he even talk to about it? A wife who frames every hardship as a test from God, a son who struggles to read basic emotion. Watch how he behaves under real danger, like the moment he throws his own body over his daughter during a tornado without a second of hesitation, and you're watching trained instinct, not improvisation. That calm under pressure isn't personality. It's 20 years of unprocessed trauma he never once unloaded on another human being. He carried a war home, then carried an entire family on top of it, alone for 2 decades without a single real scene of him talking about either one. Here's something that gives this whole story an extra layer, and it happens after George is already gone. In the spin-off following Georgie's own life, there's a moment where his father visits him in a dream. Georgie is worried in that dream that his dad might be disappointed in how his life turned out. Sit with the timing of that fear. George never once told Georgie he was disappointed in him while he was alive. Georgie built that fear entirely on his own, in the silence his father left behind, because silence is exactly what he learned growing up in that house. Nobody in that family was taught how to say the hard, honest thing out loud, and now the next generation is inheriting the exact same habit, just aimed inward instead of outward. That's the quiet cost of a man who absorbed everything and voiced almost nothing. It doesn't end with him. It becomes the family's default setting. So here's where it all lands, and here's the detail I promised you at the start. George dies in an empty locker room, alone only hours after finally getting the one piece of recognition he had waited his entire adult life to hear. Not as a husband managing everyone else's crisis, not as a dad holding the family together, as a respected professional on his own merit for the very first time. And then it's over before he can even tell Mary. Before he can say we actually did it. That timing isn't sloppy writing. It's the most brutal kind of storytelling because it mirrors exactly how he lived. Surrounded by people, understood by almost none of them, gone before the one good thing could actually reach him. Here's the final gut punch. At his funeral, his coworkers are laughing and swapping stories, and for a second, Missy assumes they're mocking her father. Georgie corrects her. They're laughing because they loved him, and that's simply how men like that grieve out loud. Sit with that for a second. Wilkins, Peterson, all of them actually loved this man. They just never once said it to his face, because that generation of men didn't talk to each other that way. Which means George almost certainly died believing he was unremarkable everywhere, at work and at home both. In reality, he was loved by nearly everyone around him. His daughter adored him. His coworkers respected him deeply. Even Meemaw, who spent years unable to stand him, eventually came around completely. The love was real the entire time. It just never once got delivered in a way he could actually hear it. And that's the actual verdict on George Cooper. He was never just the sitcom dad we laughed at for 7 seasons. He was the load-bearing wall of that entire family, the one holding everyone else up while nobody thought to check whether he was still standing underneath it. When adult Sheldon finally admits, years too late, that his father did everything he possibly could, it's the saddest kind of apology there is. The kind the person it was meant for will never get to hear. Remember how this video started with a man dying alone in a locker room hours after the best news of his life. That's not a plot twist. That's the whole thesis of this character delivered in one final quiet scene. A man who spent his entire life making sure everyone else felt held, dying in the one moment nobody was there to hold him back. If this changed how you see George Cooper, that's exactly the point, because once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. Tell me in the comments which scene hits different for you now that you know all of this, and if you think I missed the biggest clue the show left behind. Say so, because there's a good chance you're right.